I've said this before, but I think that the anthology is the most traditionally pure form of horror storytelling that goes back to the roots of the very foundational elements that first began within modern genre fiction. More than movies, more than games, novels, the horror short story is, to me, the core, the foundation that everything else was built out from. And I think that short-form horror is one of the most effective ways to effectively play within the genre, and works because of its simplicity. I think about the most recent Goosebumps Hulu series a lot, which was two miniseries that told season-long stories set within the Goosebumps universe, and nobody watched it, because nobody wants that. It is against the very spirit of what people liked about that series. It is thinking too hard about how to fix something that is not broken, something that worked because it was simple. And if they had just made a new show that was an anthology series adapting the original short children's novels again, then I imagine it would have gotten a lot more attention. And I think in this we can see where the potential power of the anthology lies. And it is from this that I have grown in time to have a great admiration for anthology-style storytelling. And I have a fondness for it when the format is both explored and experimented in within film. Which brings us to today's topic, the 2007 film Trick or Treat, which is obviously a massive cult classic for a reason, but part of that to me is what it is able to do within the anthology structure. So the film is a little bit different from your traditional anthology horror film in a few ways. The first is that each segment was written and directed by the same person, Michael Dougherty, who would later go on to direct another holiday horror film, Krampus. Now, there are obviously many horror anthology films that are directed by a single person, but I do think this somewhat goes against the spirit of what makes these kinds of things fun. Like, I don't even like found footage stuff at all, but I love the VHS movies because they bring so many different styles and perspectives into play with each one that they make. I just think that having more cooks in the kitchen on these kinds of projects is what typically will make them interesting. At least that is why I tend to gravitate personally towards works like this. The whole idea of anthologized fiction is generally found in the variety that can come from, where each author is usually working around a single unifying theme. And in that, you can find how each individual artist interprets that theme to their own sensibilities. This has also been something that has made me recently interested in zines, having just done my first submission to one in the Halloween edition of The Peep. But also, I have to keep in mind that there can be a strength that can be found as well that we will get into here, by having every single story in an anthology come from a single person, and with that, a single perspective. So the other way that this film differs is that every single one of the stories has overlap with the other stories in the film. Traditionally, you'll have an overlapping story that bookends the project, but it is fairly uncommon to have one where each of the stories references each other. And I've never seen another one that does it to the same extent that this one does, where each story basically has their payoff in another story, almost akin to, say, Pulp Fiction in format. And it is in this that a single creative vision helps the project in keeping those things straight. And so while I think it deviates from what I tend to like about these types of anthology horror films, sort of what makes Trick or Treat special and unique can be found within those deviations. In this, as a work, it also clearly knows where it stands within the history of horror fiction as well, paying clear homage to Creepshow with its comic book framework, which itself, as you know, was paying homage to the classic EC comics, as we've covered before, which were perfect examples of how to do an anthology-style collection of horror short stories successfully. And these are all things that I really love about this as a film. Now, in this, there are definitely things that I don't like about the movie, but overall, they're presenting some really solid work here. The first story, titled Principal, features an older man preying on a younger boy on Halloween night, with the man being played by the always excellent Dylan Baker, who I suspect may have been cast to riff on his performance as the pedophile in Happiness the decade previously. The only problem with this is that the movie is produced by Bryan Singer. The production company was Bad Hat Harry, which is a company that he founded, which produced all of his films. And, I just personally think including something like this is obviously incredibly distasteful, in ways that I probably shouldn't have to explain. But beyond this, I think that every section of the film works really well. and devoid of context, this segment too is funny and works. But that doesn't mean that it should be viewed necessarily within a vacuum of its own. Each of the other segments works well, with to me the bus going over the cliff with the haunted ghost kids being the best of the bunch outside of the Sam chapter, which the film is obviously most known for. Also, shout out for the film having a really good looking on-screen werewolf, which, as we will find out soon enough, is few and far between in the history of films who attempted to depict the monster. Another aspect that I really enjoy here is the maximalist approach that the film takes to its art direction. They don't just give you one jack-o'-lantern, they give you 50. They don't just have one spooky kid, you get a whole horde of them. Everything is taken to an extreme, and the fall theming is really embraced here to a degree that should really be celebrated. I just personally feel that with projects like this is just the way that things should be done. And I know this is a little biased with my own artistic sensibilities, but Halloween decorations are pretty cheap, and it's a damn shame just how many movies set around the holiday just don't fully feel like it. And when you see something like this or Hocus Pocus that really kills it with just filling the screen with Halloween theming at all times, you just know intrinsically how this thing should always feel when it's being done. In this, the heightened style almost pushes the reality that this film exists in into a place that is not our own world, but instead something similar yet distinctly different. And not to bring it up for a second time here, but I actually do feel the DNA of something like Goosebumps within this. We are thrust into a world where there is almost an obsession with the aesthetics of Halloween, and it is an aspect of this world that is not communicated to us verbally but instead visually through the production design, which I love to see. Now, you and I both know that the film is most known for the character of Sam, the small-statured killer who is the subject of the final short, where he faces off in a duel with Brian Cox. This whole fight actually reminds me a lot of what is fun about that one episode of Barry, where he's trying to kill that small girl who knows martial arts and she keeps getting away from him. And I really wish that more things would explore that Home Alone energy of an adult trying and failing to take on a child or child-sized thing in a fight. I think this is where the base appeal of Children of the Corn also exists in, which is a premise that has never been fully figured out on screen despite them making 11 films by this point. Again, they are trying there to take something that is really quite simple, that tickles the base animalistic parts of our brains, where we just want to see how many evil children a single grown man can really take out in a fight. And then they're trying to add narrative, to turn it into something that is complex, that isn't as fun to watch. I promise, if you rebooted Children of the Corn and had the whole movie almost entirely lack a story, and just had the same energy as the fight scene in this movie, where one guy is trying to escape the village, it would be an immediate classic. Like, imagine the Resident Evil 4 village fight, except it's Leon versus 60 evil children. Think of the sheer glee you felt watching the ending sequence of Weapons. People love adults fighting children. They can't say it, but they just do. Violence against children and violence against old people is always successful in a horror film, especially if the children or old people surprise you and stand a fighting chance. There should just be more of it. But to get back on track with Trick or Treat, this sequence is an example of that kind of thing done in a really fun way. And honestly, my only complaint is that this could have been pushed even further into total bizarro chaos territory. The fight is great, but it could have gone on for another 10 minutes easily. And Cox could have, lost some fingers or something in the process. I think it would have made the whole thing a lot better. The character of Sam actually originated in a short animated film by Dougherty that can be found here on YouTube. And I actually kind of would have loved to have seen them do more things with animation here in the film itself, because I love this style. And I genuinely think that a short animated chapter would have worked within the style of the piece. But everything about him is great from a design perspective. I don't know if anyone else has this problem, but sometimes it can be really hard to talk about things that are just plain decent and good. I don't really have a lot to say about the character just because he is a simple design that is executed masterfully. And beyond that, what else is there to say ultimately? In this, I don't even need to say that the film is a cult classic at this point. But beyond that, what is there to say about it besides the fact that it's a fun Halloween movie that is executed to a great degree? One thing that I feel like people often make fun of me for and are a little bit disingenuous with is perceiving me to always be trying to reach too deeply into something that isn't there within a film. saying the curtains are just blue, or that it's just not that complex, dude. But often when I'm trying to reach for those things, it isn't performative. That's just what I see in the art coming at it from my own experiences. Criticism and literary reading is a crossroads of what the art brings to the table and your own life experience. But when I come to this film, I actually don't see a lot here to be reached, and that's okay. It is fine to make a work that is purely made to be an entertaining work of horror cinema. It is a fun holiday movie that is made very well, and sometimes, genuinely, that can just be enough. And in its simplicity with that is where the love for it comes from. And furthermore, it actually ends up feeling very in line with the true heart and spirit of what it means to be a good anthology.